For those who are just joining, we're really excited today to have Jeremy Sasson, the CEO and president of Heirloom Hospitality. You have probably gone to his restaurants before in Birmingham and Detroit. And we're just really excited to hear from him today about his time at Country Day and then what he's been up to since then. So let's just take it from the top.
Sure.
Let's go back to Country Day, upper school Jeremy Sasson.
Yep.
Talk to us a little bit about what activities you were involved in, kind of bring us into your world of who you were in high school.
Sure. So give some background. I started Country Day in first grade, 1991. I think that's when that was. Were you born then?
I was born then, yes.
Just born. Okay, got it. So I started Country Day. My siblings and I started at the same time. My brother was in kindergarten. My sister was in fourth grade, I believe.
Okay.
So fast forward to high school. I think being in Country Day all of those years, I started to learn, I think at an earlier age, that everyone kind of has their own role in the school. And if you have an open mind to that and a creative thought process, you realize that not everyone is a spelling bee whiz. Not everyone is a science fair project superstar. Not everyone's an athlete. Not everyone's whatever. So being able to accept that and being okay with that was something that I think I learned early on. And I think I would say I should probably figure that out, I think, before a lot of others in my own class. So I was able to kind of realize what my gifts were, my skills were, and I was probably more socially driven than I was academically charged.
Okay.
And so I figured out how to manage the system of a school, and more particularly a private school, to get out of it what it is that I thought it was going to give me in return. And I think early on, what I realized is that I had, everyone was different, but the commonalities were we had parents that wanted the best for their kids. And I think I figured that out early on. I realized that I had two hardworking parents and they were sacrificing to send their kids to this school. So I had to at least, I had to help them ROI their investment. Even though I know, and I'll just be candid about it, I wasn't a great student, but I was a great participant to the well-being of the school ecosystem, even though I wasn't necessarily a star in the classroom. So I spent the time kind of understanding what made me different. And that's how I viewed it. I was able to get a lot out of putting out a little.
I love that.
So that's kind of what my freshman and sophomore years kind of created for me. And looking back, and I'm sure like every other student that was in what's similar to myself, they probably realized that maybe I should have done a little more my freshman or sophomore year, because by the time I got to my junior or senior year, I was studying things that maybe appealed more to me. I was less engaged in biology, and maybe was more engaged in history or whatever it may be. And so that was me on an academic and social level. I was very good at bending the rules and not breaking them at Country Day.
Just towing the line.
Even if I crossed it, I didn't fully cross it. So
right. I think that's really important, and I think that's really good for students to hear, just that you kind of identified early on what your skill set was and what you were interested in, and instead of like trying to be like interested in something that wasn't necessarily like for you, you really excelled in other areas of the school that you liked. So I think that that's really good advice. So what kind of activities were you involved in? I know you were super involved in the football team.
Yeah, so I mean, I always had an interest in sports. I think sports kind of was something that I knew that if I leveraged, it could help me open certain doors. I also really enjoyed, and most people probably didn't know this, but I was very much into the arts. So whether it be, mixed different forms of media, I enjoyed that side of me. It was the tapping into creativity. And so if you look at like the things that are the sub story behind things I had interest in, I had a lot of interest in teamwork. I had a lot of interest in creativity. And those two things kind of have, if you look at where I'm at today, hospitality is a total team game, and the experiences we create are very, creatively focused.
Yep.
And so, those were the things that I maybe didn't think were tied to the industry I'm in today, but the things I was interested in most were sports, even sports I wasn't necessarily participating in. Definitely a lot of school pride in that for myself, and
Mm-hmm.
then the arts. And so I had a lot of interest in what people were doing in the art world,
Yep.
whether it was stuff I was good at or not. Those were things that I enjoyed.
Okay. So it's coming time for junior, senior year. You're starting to look at colleges.
Sure.
You have siblings, and so your sister, you had experience watching her go through that process. But talk to us a little bit about what you were looking for in a college and kind of where your mind was going into senior year when you would have to make those decisions. And did you go on any school visits? This is for people who are like thinking about college now and possibly going off to college next year too.
Yeah. When I look back at the whole process, each one of my siblings and I are very much like great examples of Country Day as a whole. My sister's interest and choices totally
Yeah,
did not look like mine, and my brothers
so true.
were very different.
Hmm.
My sister was a film studies or films student at Tisch Film School and in New
Hmm.
York at NYU. That had nothing to do with my interest at all, and so her path was not a great example for me as a follow.
Okay.
But interestingly enough, she went and started at Art Institute of Chicago and transferred, and so
Hmm.
like I saw her kind of evolve in that role. Where my brother, for example, was a great student, a very good academic, went to Michigan, and that was his
Hmm.
thing. For me, I always had interest in playing collegiate sports.
Okay.
So I did camps, I did school visits, official visits, unofficial visits along the way, thinking that as a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid that football was something that I thought that was the only thing I could think about.
Hmm.
In hindsight, as I got older and as I got to college, I realized that I really wanted to focus on something that I think I was thought I could do for the next 30 or 40 years, not the
Hmm.
next 5 or 10 years.
Yep.
And so football became less important to me. But during my junior year, kind of give you a whole story, but football was my focus. I had some surgeries while I was in high school,
Okay.
stayed my focus, but I used my football experience to leverage, where I'd end up in college, which I started, looking at where I could play football and where I wanted to play football.
Okay.
Ironically, I've always been a Michigan fan at heart, but I elected to go play football at Michigan State. Purely, I think, because they just wanted me more, and so that's where I went.
Okay.
Um, and then from there, I realized that football wasn't, my end all be all, and eventually decided to transfer from there. And we can kind of get into that in a minute. But
Yeah.
I looked at, to answer your question from a school's perspective, it went back to, my path was a little different, right? So like I wasn't, my expectations were not GPA
Hmm.
and scores on a scholastic test or
Hmm.
scores on a placement exam. My focus was on what I could get out of the next step, and whose platform would give me the best opportunity to succeed. And really, ironically, like I always looked at college for myself as really just a starting point. It was never the end goal.
Hmm.
It was like, hey, I'm going to get there, and then I'm going to figure out what I got to do next.
Sure.
So that for me was, I was focused on college all through high school, but not in the way that I think you might expect from, someone who's, probably coming from a private school environment. I was looking
Right.
at college as like, yeah, I got to do it, but
Hmm.
it's not going to pay any bills that I create in the future. So
Right.
I got to leverage the program as far as I can.
Okay, cool. So you're at State
Yep.
and you actually ended up graduating from U Miami. So
Correct.
what made you want to transfer? And then was going to Miami the first time that you had lived so far from home?
Got it.
Probably.
Yeah, yes. There was a kind of transition. I'll tackle that as I narrate it. But the first part was, I went to Michigan State and realized that football wasn't going to be
Hmm.
the thing that I was going to spend my time on. I really wanted, ironically, kind of my shift change where from even in middle school to high school, all I cared about was football.
Yep.
Ironically, when I got to school, all I really cared about was school.
Okay.
And so being at Michigan State at that point and not caring about football,
Hmm.
I found that there was more for me to learn in life than what I was effectively learning. And nothing to say bad about Michigan State, but
Yeah.
my social environments were people that I knew either from football or from home.
Hmm.
It wasn't that worldly, and it was too easy to get in a car and go back to where I
Yeah.
came from. And I felt that at 18 or 19 years old, it was just more for me to learn out there. So my reasons for transferring were primarily tied to the fact that I wanted a smaller school experience that
Hmm.
felt like
Yeah.
I was actually having real built-in relationships. I wasn't necessarily interested in a Greek scene or any of those scenes because I was too occupied in either school or football at the time.
Okay.
That I just wanted to be an environment where I was on a world stage or an international environment, that I was meeting people that had things in common with myself, but that
Hmm.
weren't from the neighborhood
Yes.
that I grew up in. So
Okay.
that's kind of what drove that. And then obviously being in Michigan my whole life, sunshine, beaches, and anything else that was a plus was certainly an interest.
Sure.
After my first year of college at Michigan State, when I decided I'm moving on from football and I'm going to explore what else is out there, I went to New York, studied at
Okay.
NYU, effectively just to keep my education component going, and then
Hmm.
was applying to other schools at the time to see if there
Got
was
it.
a future at other places. And I said, oh, wherever is the right fit. So Miami, I applied to UCLA, USC, and I went and visited
Okay.
them, and Miami felt like home, and that's where I went.
Got it. Okay, cool. So you go to Miami, you
Yep.
graduate.
Yes.
Now bring us into like what your mindset is on like finding your first job, how you did that, and like how that transitioned into what you're doing now, and how you started Townhouse and stuff like that.
Sure. So, I mean, even since I was a young kid, I had, a lot of small startup businesses that I did for
Hmm.
my own since I was
Okay.
probably at like 14 years old. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
whether I was doing like, car wash detailing businesses to my friends'
Oh my
parents or
gosh.
other
Okay.
stuff while I was in middle school and high school,
Okay.
um, I always knew that I was going to work for myself. So
I love that.
I went to business school to learn the fundamentals of business, but I never
Hmm.
went to business school with an expectation that I was going to go work for anybody besides myself.
Got it. Okay.
So even at 18, 19, 20, now 21 and change, I never took a summer internship working for a third party. I always worked on my own businesses.
Okay.
That's just how I was wired. And I don't know if and I think a lot of this had to do with also when I looked at myself as a student, I was terrible at taking instruction. And
Hmm.
I'm still terrible at taking instructions. My wife can probably attest to that. But I just always wanted to work for myself. And so when I
Okay.
got out of college, it was 2007 when I graduated. I moved back home probably like 3 or 6 months after I was done with
Okay.
school, with an intent to kind of start my own version of what my dad was already doing for a profession, which was real estate development. I wanted to kind of go do
Okay.
my own thing. So now 2008 comes around, and it's
Hmm.
obviously economic,
Right. It
transition.
was a time. Yeah.
And so starting that business wasn't that enlightening. So I actually, this is Obama starting in office. I moved to New Jersey with a college roommate, packed up my car, moved, lived in his parents' basement for like a year and a half.
Okay.
And I started a kind of renewable energy focused business doing solar development in New
Okay.
Jersey with him. Um, we were on the
Wow,
road.
that's really cool. Okay.
Yeah. So this was pre restaurants.
Okay.
I did it for about a year and a half. I'm thinking I'm 24 at the time.
Hmm.
I don't know if I was just fed up of living in New Jersey, fed up of living in his parents' basement, or the fact that like that business was going, but I had dreams of grandeur
Uh-huh.
that were probably not tied to that business. And I literally just one day said, I'm going to go do restaurants. Weirdly enough,
Oh,
his dad was in the
okay.
restaurant business. So for a year and a half, I was eating dinner at his dinner table, talking with his
Yeah.
dad
Just kind
shop.
of learning about that. Yeah.
And I think I just felt like that was more my calling than what we were doing.
Hmm.
So I decided to leave. It's 2010. I moved back to Michigan, the market's still very soft,
Mm-hmm.
which I really was more an opportunity for me and how I saw it. And so I took what I had saved, went to a couple family and friends for what I didn't have the balance for, and I started
Mm-hmm.
Townhouse Birmingham from there.
Got it.
And
I love that you shared that first part of your story with us, just because I think
sure,
when you're a student, you look at someone who's extremely successful in what they do now, and you sort of just think, oh, well, one day they just did that and they knew exactly the path they were going to take, and now they're there. But
sure.
I love that you actually tried all these different things and had a lot of different ideas before you decided to do Townhouse. So,
Yeah, definitely a very brick by brick approach to where I'm at today. Doesn't
right.
just happen that way. So
Right. So you start Townhouse in Birmingham, and I mean, I would argue that that was like a very cool thing to happen in Birmingham at the time, and I think people were
sure.
super excited about it. So how has your business grown since then? And with like the addition of Prime and Proper and things like that, how did you decide that that was like going to be your next move in Detroit?
Sure. I mean, if you think about it in context, Townhouse Birmingham is a very small restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it aligns with the fact that you don't just roll out of bed and have Prime and Proper. I mean, Prime and Proper
Mm-hmm.
came from learning along the way, things that worked, things that did not work, things that
Mm-hmm.
I totally messed up on along the way, or learned along the way. And so, started with one restaurant. It was, I would argue, successful for what it was or what it is, and knock on wood has been the
Yep.
same along the way. It's evolved, but it still remains successful today. And so in theory, I started with one project and I didn't know anything. And so for those out there, it's not like I was a chef, and it's not like I had years of training running restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
I was really just a very stubborn, picky guest.
Mm-hmm.
And I just leveraged what it was that I liked and said, I
Yes.
hope,
Okay.
obviously, if what I like has an audience, then others will like it too, and
Mm-hmm.
there may be a business from it. So I just leveraged as hard as I possibly could what it is I knew that I liked, and what it is I knew, more importantly, that I didn't like. And then I looked around and said, what's missing here? Why
Right.
why is someone not doing this? Or how come this community doesn't have that? And so Thomas Birmingham, which was in 2011, we opened. Eventually, as I sharpened my teeth understanding the business, we opened in
Mm-hmm.
2015 Townhouse Detroit, which was a supersized me version of Townhouse
Mm-hmm.
Birmingham in many ways. And then in 2017, we opened Prime and Proper, which was a different concept and was new territory for me.
Yep.
But each one of those projects had innately did that were important to me
Mm-hmm.
along the way that I wasn't able to accomplish in the projects previous, that
Okay.
stimulated me to go do the next project. So,
Okay.
that's kind of how they've evolved over the years. But
Okay.
yeah, listen, they all start one project at a time, and that's something you have to be able to accept. You don't go
Yep.
from, it's not a rocket ship, it's basically it's an incline, and hopefully you're able to keep filling your gas and changing your tires along the way, that you can get to
Mm-hmm.
the top of the mountain and be okay that it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so with coronavirus going on,
Sure.
obviously all the restaurants have been impacted around here. So how have you had to be creative, and how can people still order and support your restaurants?
In short, coronavirus is effectively, it's changed the landscape, it's changed the narrative, it's changed how we're
Yep.
doing certain things. But I think it's the context of the word change, and I think that's something that we are super comfortable embracing in our organization and in
Mm-hmm.
life. You get thrown certain curveballs and you evolve. No different than I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, myself as a student, as an individual at Country Day,
Mm-hmm.
growing up, I was okay evolving and changing to get what I wanted out of the experience. So we at first decided, for the well-being of our own employees, we're going to close all of our
Mm-hmm.
restaurants and then regroup from there. We kept 13 core team members on that were leadership within their stores or within the corporation, and have kept them on employed since the beginning.
Okay.
And then when we kind of ran out of things to do, we kind of had a conversation, said, let's offer our community what they want.
Hmm.
And so what we did is we opened one store to begin with, which is Townhouse Birmingham. It opened up 2 Fridays ago.
Yep.
And I mean, surprisingly busier than I'd expect. And some of the things that we've evolved to is modified some things on our menu that we knew carried out very well and that people would enjoy from the well-being of their home.
Right. Okay.
That maybe didn't require, a seasoned server to kind of help that
Hmm.
experience become a good one. Then we started featuring things from our other locations that people had
Right.
demand for. So our butchery department has still been
Right.
active. We've
Hmm.
made steaks available for people to eat at home.
Very cool.
We've created creative ways to take Townhouse Birmingham to your grill, and now
Hmm.
you'll see some more grill kits coming out here shortly.
Okay.
And then our newest project, which is in development in Midtown, called Sauce, which is like a
Right.
California-inspired Italian
Hmm.
concept. Our chef from that concept is, making fresh bread and rolling fresh pasta daily, and so we're
Awesome.
featuring those products too. So we're kind of ghost kitchening our other brands
Hmm.
within the availability of Townhouse Birmingham. So this community gets to try some of those things from downtown until those stores eventually open.
Okay. So how do you think moving forward the restaurant industry is going to change because of what's going on now? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I got more thoughts for the time than you have, but I would say in short, this is a very big evolutionary reality for the restaurant world.
Hmm.
Restaurants in general are, there's not a lot of, it's very easy to get into a restaurant.
Right.
There's not a lot of barriers to entry as far as getting into a restaurant. And I think this will change the perspective of those who are not totally, immersed in and saturated in the idea of being in this business. This
Yeah.
is, you talked about tiptoeing the line, like this is, you got to jump in the pool
Hmm.
going forward to stay in this business. And the model has certainly changed and I think has evolved in the sense that they may not be as profitable as they were, and they may not be as lucrative as they maybe once were. But I think they will go back to that eventually. These statistics I'm going to throw at you are not facts, but they're my assumptions.
Okay.
I would say 30% of restaurants might not be here
Hmm.
by the end of 2020.
Okay.
And for every challenge, there's good opportunity that comes on the other side of it. And I look at it like when I got into this business in 2010, there were not a lot of people signing up to get into restaurants in 2010.
Hmm.
There was a time
Yeah.
where, there was still uncertainty coming out of the economic story that we were in. So a decade later, I find myself kind of right back where I'm at with a
Right.
little bit of a different storyline. Obviously, this is not just, recessional economy. This is, more of a health narrative
Hmm.
impacting it. And
Right.
it goes back to the concept of change. I think some restaurants will change and
Hmm.
evolve, and some restaurants won't change and they'll die.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
And
that makes perfect sense.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so I have one more question for you, and
sure.
I'm pretty curious as to your answer on this because you are a person who has kind of always had a CEO mentality. So, sitting where you are now, what advice would you give to your 12th grade self who's about to graduate from Country Day and go out into the world of being your own boss?
Um, I think it's a few just mottos I live by. The first one is you don't get what you don't ask for.
Hmm.
Um, Failing is okay so long you're willing to try again. And I think more importantly is don't do what other people think you should do. I think
Hmm.
you should, as
Love that.
cliche as it might sound, do what you are destined to do. And if you don't know what
Hmm.
that is, you got to, dig deeper in your interpersonal self and figure that part out. If you asked me growing up would I've ever participated in working in a restaurant, I would have laughed at you. And I would
Hmm.
have been like, because my
Yeah.
perception of that is, it's like it's not my calling. Um,
Hmm.
but looking back at it, it's just like, no, I'm contributing to our community in the way in which,
Yes.
I'm fashioned to do it best, and that's our role.
Hmm.
So if you want to have a big picture approach to things, early on, I think you will find more well-being coming from that. And I think that comes from being okay navigating yourself going into college. Some people
Hmm.
realize that as they get out of Country Day, that that's Country Day is merely just the start. If
Hmm.
you think it's the
Exactly.
finish, then expect that it's the end. And so I looked at it always as this is just a place where it
I
all
love that.
starts. Which is why, like, my kids will go to Country Day too, so they'll have a chance to see that, along the way.
Right. I love that. That's really good advice. Thank
Yep.
you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us today.